Good morning. Today is Monday, June 5th, 2017. My name is Ann Peskin, and it is my honor and privilege today to interview Jackie Heftman for the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Ann.
Tell me your name.
My name is Jackie Heftman.
And where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York on July 19th, 1944.
And that makes you how old?
Makes me almost 73.
Who are your grandparents? Tell us a little bit.
My father's parents were Ida and Samuel Burke, and they were born and raised not in this country, but in Poland, Czechoslovakia. I mean, the borders kept changing back then, so it's hard to know exactly where in Eastern Europe, but definitely Eastern Europe. And they were mostly, spent most of their life in Brooklyn and then moved to Miami, Florida when they were senior citizens.
How did they earn their living?
My grandfather was a painter, and my grandmother was a stay-at-home mom, and I don't ever remember her talking about what she did. She did a lot of baking, I remember as a child, but we were not raised with them. When we lived, I was born in Brooklyn, but when my family moved to Florida, I was about a year and a half. And so they were in New York, we lived in Florida, we didn't see them very often. And then when they moved to Miami, we would go down and visit them sometimes in the summer. But we didn't spend a lot of time around them. We were much closer to my mom's parents.
And tell me about your mom's?
And that's my mom's mother's name was Ethel, and my grandfather's name was Charles Kaiser. And they also lived in Brooklyn, and when they lived in Brooklyn, my grandmother they owned a home in Brooklyn Heights, and it was a rooming house, so she kind of ran the rooming house. My grandfather was a plumber. And then during World War II, they were building VA hospitals in Florida, and that's what got him down to Daytona. He went down to build a VA hospital, and he got off the train in the middle of the winter, and it was 80 degrees, and it was okay, come on down. And the family all moved down to Daytona. So I was raised around them. And my grandmother was a definite stay-at-home grandmother, and she spent a lot of time with us. She didn't work, but my grandfather was a plumber.
And who are your parents?
My parents, Rosalind and Harry Burke, and they met in Brooklyn. And then when my grandfather had everybody come down, they had already married, and I was a year and a half. And so my dad had many jobs. When they lived in New York, he worked on the docks as a stevedore. And then when they moved to Florida, he had many different jobs. But mostly, I remember as a child, he owned a gas station. And that took up a lot of his time. And my mom helped him in the gas station. And so one of the questions about what did you talk about at dinner time, we had very strange dinners. My mother would cook dinner for us, and then she would go downstairs to the station and run it while my dad came up and had dinner, and then he would go back. And so I don't remember the kinds of conversations that I and my husband had with our children when we were young, having with my parents. It was eat and go do your homework kind of thing.
Now, I have you down in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get to Fairfield County?
Okay, so after I got out of high school, I went to University of Florida for a year. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I guess I wasn't in a study mode back then. So I came back to Daytona and went to vocational school and got a certificate. You know, those days secretaries were all women, and so I learned shorthand and bookkeeping and those skills, and it enabled me to support myself. But one summer I met my future husband in Daytona. He was in the Marine Corps at the time, stationed in Jacksonville, but Daytona was a very big military weekend town. So Air Force, you name it. They came to Daytona to have fun at the beach. And actually, he was a blind date. And the only reason I went out with him, because at that point I had had it with going out with servicemen. My cousin met him on the beach, he and his friends, and she says to me, he's Jewish, and he's 6'2". Thought, okay, what do I have to lose? He's tall, he's Jewish, I'll give it a try. And so that's how I met my husband. But, make a long story short, he started his own business, and he had a factory in Yonkers. And we were looking, at the time, the kids were young. We were living in Stuyvesant Town in New York City. And my oldest was 6 and the little guy was 2. And we were looking for a house. We were ready to move out of New York City. And so it was, where do we look? We looked a little in Westchester, and then we realized, looking at a map, that commuting would be just as easy for him to go from here to Yonkers as it would be if we lived in Westchester. And the homes here were much less expensive than in Westchester. So that's actually, we were looking for diversity. We wanted to live in an area that was city and suburban, but that had a diverse population. And that's really what got us to Stamford.
And what year was that you came? Do you know?
Let's see, Ethan is going to be 40 and he was 6, so it was 34 years. Yeah, 34 years ago in April, whatever year that was, 30. Yeah, and so we've been here ever since, and we love it, you know.
Oh, good. What was your family's involvement in politics, if any, or in community service?
My parents were very involved in the temple. My parents were both on the committee that washed the bodies after people passed away. And I always thought that that was the most incredible thing you could do for your fellow human being. But they weren't politically active. I don't remember sitting around the table having political conversations. I don't think I became politically aware until John F. Kennedy's assassination. I mean, I remember, voting for him. I think that was the first time I ever voted. But I really didn't become politically aware until that event. And then after that, it was sort of, I was much more aware of what was going on in the country politically.
So were you religious at home?
Yes, we were. I mean, I taught Sunday school when I was young. I went to Hebrew school. Yeah, my brother was bar mitzvahed. Yeah, we were. Daytona is a small town, and it didn't at that time, I don't even think it does at this time, have a large Jewish population. So those of us who were Jewish kind of banded together, and it became a very close-knit community.
Was there anything in education in high school or an era that would affect your political views at all?
Well, I think it's probably more from I wouldn't call it political. I went to an all-white high school. In Daytona at the time, the Intercoastal Waterway was on one side and the ocean was on the other. So that part of Daytona, which we call the beach side, was 100% white. The only African Americans that I ever came in contact with were the woman who came every couple of weeks to clean the house, or the man who worked for my dad in the gas station. On the other side of the river, the mainland side, was where the community lived, the African American community, and those schools, so it was total segregation at the time. But I do remember being Jewish, being different. When we used to have assemblies on Friday, the assembly began with the Lord's Prayer. When Passover came around, and I would bring tuna fish on matzah for lunch, because schools definitely weren't closed for any Jewish holidays, and so you always felt different. And so I was aware of that. And I think that when I became older and more aware of how different my life was than the average person out there, or certainly an African American or any other minority, because I don't want to say I felt discriminated against, but I knew I was different. And so I could empathize with other people in minority groups and how they would feel as different as I felt. So I think that has always colored my thinking.
Tell me, who were your political heroes when you were growing up?
Other than Kennedy, I really don't think I had what I would consider a political. I don't have heroes. I mean, I don't. Yeah, that word is kind of because people have foibles. Nobody is a hero in my mind, as far, except if you do something courageous in war. Those are heroes. But I don't think about political people as being heroes. For me, political is synonymous with public service.
Okay.
And so I don't really separate the two. I mean, I have people who I respect, but nobody that I would consider
Continue
a
on.
hero.
How do you define politics?
Yeah, that's how I define politics, as public service. I don't think of myself as a politician, even though I run for office, so I guess by definition I'm a politician. But what I do and what I've done in the past, from the time my children were little and I became active in PTO, which is how I got started in the whole community service aspect, it's always been about public service. Because all through the years, no matter what I've done, no matter what board I've been on, no matter how active I was in the party, I've never made money off of anything that I've done. So yeah, I think of it as public service.
And how did you actually get in? I know the PTO is an
Yes,
entrance, but
that was an entrance, and because I became active and I became president of the PTO at Northeast, and then I went on to Turn of River, and then citywide at PT Council. In those years, you meet a lot of people. I became friendly with Andrew McDonald and was very active in his campaigns. And through that, I became in touch with the people who were part of the Democratic Party in Stanford.
you just answered. What party do you?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely a Democrat, a very strong Democrat.
Now, you've mentioned some of the offices that you held as PTO. Let's go on from there.
Okay, so from PTO, I mentioned I became active in politics. I decided after I had been president of PT Council, which is the citywide umbrella organizations for all the PTOs, that I wanted to run for the Board of Ed. And so I primaried, this was in, I want to say 1993, and lost because it's very difficult to buck the party or to run against the party. But it was a good experience for me. After that, I met then Mayor Malloy, was active in one of his mayoral campaigns, and he asked me if I would go on the zoning board, which I did. And I was on the zoning board for 11 years. I think at least 8 or 9 of them I was chairman. And then during that period of time, I was active in the party. I was his treasurer for many of his mayoral campaigns. And the years on the zoning board were pretty turbulent. There were lots of things going on at Stanford at the time, and I think probably the biggest accomplishment of my political life or my public service life was getting the affordable housing regulation adopted in Stanford. That happened under my leadership. Rick Redness and I worked really hard. We got the support we needed, and that got the 10% set aside. Before then, there was no such thing as private developers paying anything into affordable housing. So that's I think of as my crowning achievement in that area. And from there, I went to the Urban Redevelopment Commission and was on that for about 6 years, chairman for several of those. And during my tenure on the Urban Redevelopment Commission, we finally got Park Square West development finished, which is in the downtown around West Park Place. And it was very interesting doing that. I always felt like I was following, Edith Sherman was chairman of that, and there hadn't been very many women chairman of the Urban Redevelopment Commission, so I always felt that I was following in great footsteps. Trying to think. So then after that, Ellen Camhigh called me one year when I was in Florida, and she said to me, we need somebody to run for the Board of Ed. Would you do that? And so I did, and I won. That was in 2008. That was when Obama was running for president. So everybody, you didn't have to do very much of anything to win that year. All the Democrats got pulled in. So probably for 4 or 5 years, I was on the zoning board, on the Board of Ed and the Urban Redevelopment Commission at the same time. And then it just got to be too much. There was too many conflicts in meetings, and so I left the Urban Redevelopment Commission. And I'm still on the Board of Ed.
So how many,
This is my 9th year on the Board of Ed.
so you run?
So this'll, if I run in November, because I'm up, it'll be my 4th election cycle.
You planning to?
I'm leaning towards it. I'm still enthused about it. I still love what I do. And I am the lone historical voice on the board, because Jeff Allswanger has been on 2 years less than I am, but I don't believe he's running this year. So if the two of us don't run, it leaves, I think it leaves a void on the board, because everybody else is within a year or two of being brand new.
Much younger.
And much younger, yeah. So it's good to have a cross section of people with kids and people who are in the middle and people who are retired. So I think the board has that now.
Did you have a mentor in this whole process?
I think probably Andrew McDonald was a good mentor politically for me. I had a lot of respect for Andrew. I still do, and he's still a very good friend. And he has had, because now he's not allowed to be political at all, being a Supreme Court justice, but he had wonderful political skills and instincts, and he was a great help there. On the education side, I would say probably Marty Levine, Dudley Williams, people who had come before me on the Board of Ed have always been great mentors. Polly Rao, for a time. And I worked with her at Roxbury School, and she was a mentor also.
Interesting. Who are your supporters, really, if you think about it?
Well, I think the people who are in the education field know where I stand on issues, and I believe that they are my strongest supporters. People like Reagan Allen, who are very involved in town. You know, for a time for a couple of years after I came on the board, we were going through a middle school transformation. And that was a very hot button issue at the time. That, if you don't remember, that was when we were trying to detract the middle schools. I'm very proud of the fact that I was instrumental in getting that middle school transformation accomplished. I was a very strong supporter of Josh Starr at the time. And that was not very popular, and it wasn't popular amongst the Jewish community either, because many people in the Jewish community wanted things to stay the way they were. And it just wasn't right, what we were doing, and I never could understand. I mean, Ellen Camhigh was a huge supporter of keeping things the way they were. And it just wasn't. My son, who you know, it was detrimental to his education, because even though he was white and privileged, he was pigeonholed into a track when he went into middle school, which forced him to take classes all in the same track. And in some things he was good at, and some things he wasn't. He needed to be in a different place, in a different ability group for certain subjects, but he couldn't because of the way the tracking was done. So it wasn't just for minority students that it pigeonholed them. It didn't work for a lot of students. But the kids that it did work for, or whose parents thought it worked for them, it was very difficult. And so ultimately Josh lost his superintendency over it. He got pushed out. But it's stood the test of time, because it hasn't been a detriment to the top kids, and it has been a huge help to those children who are no longer considered the kids who can't learn.
It's my direction. What are some of the obstacles you faced?
Yeah, that's the biggest.
That, yeah.
Yeah, the middle school transformation was definitely the biggest obstacle.
And you did overcome it.
Yes, we definitely
Great.
did. I think that when you're doing what's right, and you really believe that it's right, I mean, it doesn't always work out, but when it does, it just validates the fact that, yeah, that it was the right thing to do.
Let's go back to campaigning. That has always intrigued me. How did you feel about the campaigning, first of all?
It is very difficult putting yourself out there. I mean, I am not a person who is comfortable, or wasn't at the time, with public speaking or with just going into a room with people you don't know and going up to people and introducing yourself. When you're campaigning, you're forced to do that because people don't knock on your door. You have to get out there and knock on theirs. But running citywide is very different than running for the Board of Reps. You know, if you're running for a seat on the Board of Reps, you can go knock doors in your district, try to meet everyone. You can't do that citywide, so it's much more difficult. It costs more money to run citywide because you have to, and the only way you have to talk to the voter is by mail. I mean, there are some debates, but there are very few. You have a little bit of newspaper coverage, but
Well, the Democratic Party puts out one form with everybody.
yeah, they'll do one mailing that has the whole, usually that has the whole ticket on it. But if you want to differentiate yourself, because sometimes you're running at a time that not everybody can win. Sometimes you run 3 people and only 2 people can win because the Board of Ed, by state law, you know, you're not allowed to have more than 6 people of any one party on the board at any time. So even though a seat may be open, it doesn't mean that a Democrat can take it. So that makes it more difficult to set yourself apart. But
How'd you raise the money and how much was it?
well, I was very fortunate because of my involvement in politics through Andrew McDonald's campaigns and through Mayor Malloy's at the time campaigns. And so I knew a lot of people, and I also had access to a lot of names and addresses of people who had supported them. And so you send out a letter and you hope that your friends and people who respect your ability and your position will contribute, and they do. The first time that I ran, we raised about $25,000. We were running as a slate, there were 3 of us. The second time, I think we raised about 10, and the last time, you know, the more your people know you, the less you have to spend. And the last time was about 12. It's not an insignificant amount. But it depends on, a lot depends on who's at the top of the ticket. Years that the president is at the top of the ticket, it makes it easier for the under ticket. When it's just a local year, it's harder. So that determines how much you have to spend.
When you were in the debates, were they hard for you?
I don't want to say they were hard. The first one ever, because you have no idea what people are going to ask you. But to a certain extent, it's hard because you haven't really firmed up your positions because you're not on the board yet. So even though you think you know where you want to go, until you get on the board, you really don't have a clue. And it takes at least 2 terms before you get to understand how things work, how people think, how you work as a group. And sometimes, depending upon who's on the board, determines how the board is going to be perceived by the public. And in the years that we were doing middle school transformation, and for several years after, it was very contentious on the board, mainly because the political parties got involved in trying to determine who was going to be on the board. And they put people up for those positions who were opposed to middle school transformation. So once they got elected, it became very difficult on the board. And it's only within the last couple of years that things have quieted down and the board is working as a cohesive unit.
What are some of the main issues beside the transformation that came up during your terms?
Well, I think the major issue now, and has been for the last 5 or 8 years, is the overcrowding. Even though we have a new elementary school, it hasn't solved the overcrowding issue. We're one of the only cities in the state of Connecticut that has a growth that's growing. Everybody else is contracting. Other districts in Connecticut are worrying about what they're going to do because they have declining enrollment. We have just the opposite here in Stamford. We have increasing enrollment. And it's not just that the enrollment is increasing, but the population in the schools is changing. When my kids were in the public schools, it was about 50% white and 50% minority. Now it's about 65% minority and 35%. What has happened because of that, it means that we have many more children in the system that need special services, especially our English language learner population, which is growing by leaps and bounds. Because of that, you need much more space in your schools to accommodate all of the special programs. Our special ed population is growing by leaps and bounds. We have a great special ed program in Stamford. People move here from all over because they know we have a great special ed program. So it's not just the increasing enrollment in the regular classroom, it's all of the ancillary classrooms that you need. And we were lucky enough that we got the state grant for the new school that we have because the city was absolutely 100% opposed to funding a new school. But we actually need another one. We don't have enough space in our schools. We're greatly overcrowded. So that's going to be the challenge going forward.
Any problem with unions?
Not really. We have a pretty good relationship with our union. Part of the reason, every 3 years, we negotiate contracts, and we haven't been in arbitration in a long time. And it's not because we're giving away the store. We actually, since I'm on the board, have made tremendous progress in containing our costs, our pension, our health costs, and our OPEB, the costs that happen after a teacher retires. We have been able to get the unions to contribute much more.
As well as the custodian?
Yeah, custodians is probably our most difficult contract, but it's also difficult because they don't just work for the Board of Ed, they work for the city. So it makes it very hard to negotiate that contract because they're not just negotiating with us. They're actually city employees who happen to work in the public schools, but we don't employ them.
Now let's look. What was your proudest moment in your political career up to now?
Yeah, I would say the affordable housing regulation in Stamford and the middle school transformation. Those were the things I'm
What was
most
your
proud
most
of.
regrettable moment?
My most regrettable moment was not being able to keep Josh Starr as our superintendent. That he got caught up in the political turmoil that was going on in Stamford at the time. And he wound up losing his superintendency over.
He came from New York.
He came from Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
He had really the instincts to be a great superintendent. He knew he firmly believed in what he thought was in the best interest of kids. His downfall is that as a superintendent you have to be political. And he just didn't get it. Stamford is very difficult. And the new superintendent that we have now, who we are very much in favor of and who we think is going to do a wonderful job, learned a lot this year going through the political process, trying to get our budget through the city boards. You got to do it once before you can really understand. Stamford is not an easy place. It really isn't. There are a lot of factions, and there's a lot of loud I shouldn't say that there are a few loud voices that carry the day for everybody else. And those voices are not always speaking in what's in the best interest of children in the city of Stamford.
Interesting. Was being Jewish a help or a hindrance in your political career?
I don't think it had anything to do with it. I don't think it mattered one way or another. It never came up in any context that I can think of. I don't think it, I don't even know if people know. The average person out there who knows me from the Board of Ed, I don't think they're aware that I'm Jewish. I don't hide it, I don't, it just isn't something that's ever.
Do you belong to any of the synagogues?
We don't now. When our kids were younger, we belonged to Temple Bethel. I mean, we go to services on High Holiday, but we're not active members.
Mm-hmm. Are your children involved in politics?
Not at all.
Would you want them to be?
If they wanted to be, because for me, as I said before, it's synonymous with public service. So I would like my kids to be publicly aware and be community involved, not just with their own families, but with what's in the best interest of the larger good. You know, excuse me, right now they're both involved in raising very young children. So I'm hoping that, once they get over that hump, that they will be, because they certainly grew up in a very political family. Even though my husband was never in politics, he's very well read, has very strong opinions. And so
like
there
yours or
yes.
different?
Sometimes we agree. I mean, he's a Democrat also, but sometimes we disagree. But the kids have always been part of that political conversation. And my younger son, when I was working, when I was the treasurer for Governor Malloy's first gubernatorial campaign, Micah worked in the campaign with us. And it kind of turned him off to politics because while he is much the same way I am in his thinking about other people, and he has many diverse friends, he's always did going to Stamford Public Schools, he was turned off by the money end of politics and what you have to go through in order to be able to run, and how you have to ask people for money. And so he's not very much of not at all involved in politics. Very much involved in what's going on in the world. Reads, both my kids do. They're very aware of what's going on, but not politically active.
It was one thing that's not here that I was interested in. There are a number of different political groups that are in the city. Are they still very much involved, like the Irish group?
No, not at all anymore. I mean, there's still an Italian club over on the east side. The west side clubs are all gone, like they were when you were active. No, the Green Party in Stamford is very very small. Although they are running somebody for the Board of Ed this year, there aren't very many members. The Bernie Sanders faction of the Democratic Party was very active in the last election. I don't know whether they will continue to be. And yeah, so I know those old-time groups are just not there anymore. Yeah.
What legacy would you say you're leaving behind? You're not stopping in politics, I'm sure, for a while.
No, I don't think so. I think I'm still building on the legacy. Right now it's, the affordable housing and the middle school transformation and the new school, and I'm hoping that there will continue to be other areas that I can make a difference.
Is there anything I haven't asked that you would like to share?
So I think you've covered it pretty well. I would just encourage people to be involved, and especially in these times. We really all, and if you're a Democrat in these times, you have to be involved. I encourage people to always help their fellow man and do that however you can do it, whether it's politics or not politics. But that's what's driven me all these years, and I hope it will continue to.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Ann. Thank you for asking me. I'm very honored to be included in your project. Thank you.